Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is dead and Israel is moving upwards and onwards, literally. I'll have all the details coming up with analysis on In Focus. So just as Shabbat was coming in on Friday night yesterday, we got word that the Air Force had conducted a bombing raid of Hezbollah's headquarters bunker in the Dakhia quarter of Beirut, and that Hassan Nasrallah was the target. And during the day today, Saturday, the IDF announced that he had in fact died. Hassan Nasrallah had been the Secretary General of Hezbollah for 32 years, and in his capacity, he was the sole strategic decision maker along with Iranian dictator Ali Khamenei for all actions, including going to war, attacking Israel, kidnapping Israelis, bombing the Israeli embassy in Argentina, bombing the AMIA building, killing in the largest anti-Semitic attack in history until October 7th in 1994, and so on and so forth. He has the blood of thousands of Americans killed by Hezbollah operatives in Iran and in Syria. He has thousands and thousands of dead Syrians on his conscience and on his hands, their blood, along with Iraqis and many, many others, French, Bulgarians, South Americans, Europeans of all types, and Arabs from nearly every country in the Middle East, all on the hands of Hassan Nasrallah. And if you want to understand a little bit about who the man is and what made him tick, here is a compilation of his statements over the years that was put out by the IDF earlier today. It's just two minutes long. So here, let's just take a watch.
لقد وصف الإمام الخميني إسرائيل وصفا واقعيا ودقيقا جدا ما سماها بالغدة السرطانية، وكلنا يعلم بأن السرطان طبيعته أن ينتشر في الجسد وأن يفتك، وأن الحل الوحيد للسرطان هو استئصاله وعدم الاستسلام له وعدم إعطاء الفرصة له.
كالدولة المتحضرة رضوان الله على الإمام الخميني لما سماها الشيطان الأكبر. طوال التاريخ البشري دولة وقيادة متوحشة ونخبة متوحشة كما هو الحال الآن في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. هي إسرائيل في قلب هذه الأمة العربية والإسلامية. هي إسرائيل إذا بتتوفر إرادة لدى النخب، لأن الإرادة لدى الأمة موجودة، ليست أكثر من طعمة آكل، لقمة وحدة بتطلع خالصة.
علاقة حزب الله بالجمهورية الإسلامية لقيادة الثورة الإسلامية في إيران، لا أبقى لحظة واحدة في أجهزته لو لم يكن لدي يقين وقطع في أن هذه الأجهزة تتصل عبر مراتب إلى الولي الفقيه القائد المبرئ للذمة الملزم قراره. على مستوى العلاقة العضوية والجوهرية مع قيادة الثورة الإسلامية في إيران وولاية الفقيه، هذه المسألة بالنسبة لنا أمر مقطوع به.
وعندنا أذكياء وعندنا تقنيين وعندنا ناس متخصصين، وبالتعاون أيضا مع الخبراء في الجمهورية الإسلامية نحن أصبح لدينا قدرة على تحويل صواريخنا الموجودة بالآلاف، على تحويل صواريخنا إلى صواريخ دقيقة.
لا يوجد هدف إسرائيلي في البر أو في البحر لا تطاله صواريخ المقاومة. لدينا قدرة بحرية ما بدنا نبالغ، قدرة بحرية كافية لتحقيق الردع المطلوب.
So as we discussed last week, Hezbollah is an Iranian organization. It was established in 1982 from a breakaway group of terrorists from the Amal Shiite militia that was fighting Israel during the First Lebanon War in 1982. Hassan Nasrallah was one of the original members of Hezbollah. He was a senior leader of Hezbollah in its first decade until he took over the organization completely in 1992. And as I said, in that position, he was the terror master of all of Hezbollah's operations, from running drugs and laundering money to waging war against Israel, to assisting Iran in carrying out their insurgencies against the United States and Britain and the people of Iraq in Iraq, and the same in Syria. They were a major participant in the genocide of the Sunnis of Syria during the so-called civil war that went on for about a decade, beginning in 2012 in Syria. So this is a mass murderer. His ultimate goal was the annihilation of Israel, the annihilation of the United States. He spoke about Israel as a temporary presence on the scene in the Middle East, and he believed that it was within his power and within the power of Hezbollah and their precision-guided missiles and their massive missile arsenal that he and the Iranians had built up over 20 years to destroy the state of Israel. And now Israel lives, and Hassan Nasrallah is dead. And not only is he dead, his entire leadership level, all of the general staff of Hezbollah, all of his deputies, all of them are dead. Moreover, Israel killed the successor that was named after his death was announced. His name was Hassan Khalil Yassin. Hassan Khalil Yassin was just killed in another Air Force bombing in Beirut. So not only is Hassan Nasrallah dead, his successor is dead. And just by the same token, in the bombing on Friday evening, not only was Nasrallah killed, but the successors of many of the commanders that were killed in the Air Force bombing of Radwan Land Forces leadership headquartered in Beirut several days ago, their replacements were also killed, as was the deputy head of the Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, which is in charge of all of Iran's international terrorist operations. So the deputy commander who was in charge of Lebanon and Syria, that is the war against Israel principally, he was killed as well at Nasrallah's side. And one of the interesting things about the bombing is that apparently everybody had gathered together in order to watch Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the UN, so that the last person they saw before they were killed was Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's, let me tell you, that is just a huge deal. It was an incredibly ballsy move by Prime Minister Netanyahu, if I may say so, on family television, going to the UN, giving that speech. He gave the speech after he gave the green light to the Air Force to go ahead. This was an operation that had been in the works for several days ahead of time, when Israel had an indication of where Hassan Nasrallah was going to be and that we were going to have the opportunity to take him out. According to the early reports, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant was not interested in taking care of this particular piece of business. He wanted to coordinate it ahead of time with the Americans. But what we saw was that the Biden administration itself was placing massive pressure on Israel to reach some sort of a ceasefire with Hassan Nasrallah, with Hezbollah, that was going to leave this Iranian military that controls Lebanon intact. And what Netanyahu had done was he told the Americans that he would agree to have some kind of negotiations with Hezbollah. The United States, the Biden administration, had transmitted that message to Hezbollah. And I think that was the reason why everybody was feeling comfortable enough to be congregating in one place in this one bunker under a apartment complex in Beirut to watch, Netanyahu's speech on Friday afternoon, Israel time, Friday morning, Washington time, because they had been lulled essentially into complacency by a combination of American pressure on Israel to reach a ceasefire that would save him and his organization, and Israel's unwillingness to say no to the United States. So there he was watching Prime Minister Netanyahu. Netanyahu was giving his speech at the UN General Assembly, knowing the entire time that the Air Force was planning and about to conduct the bombing that was going to kill Nasrallah.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East.
So this is an incredible move. And when you watched his speech, he seemed, I watched it, in real time. And I looked at my husband, it was right before Shabbat, and I said, He looks mad, but you can imagine the amount of pressure that this man was under. You got no sense of that. You got a sense that he was revolted by the UN and what an anti-Semitic circus it is. But, that Israel's being subjected to a diplomatic pogrom there. You saw dozens and dozens of leaders of ostensibly civilized countries, plus Iran and some others, Qatar, leaving ahead of his speech and refusing to listen to anything he said. That's true. But here he was. He delivered this incredible, very, very forceful speech, spoke directly to the citizens and the soldiers of Israel. He said, be brave and of good spirit. God is with you. And then, boom, there went Hassan Nasrallah, right? And so now the Americans are pretty mad, apparently, according to one of the reporters on Israeli television, because Netanyahu led them to believe that he was willing to make a deal. But that also isn't true, because the Americans should have been listening to him. He said that he was willing to conduct negotiations under fire, and that Israel's only position was that Hezbollah has to remove all of its forces to north of the Litani River so that our citizens can go back to their homes safely. And that's the only deal that Israel is interested in. So I don't think that he ever misled anybody. He was very clear about what Israel's intentions are and what our demands are. And then he went out to achieve them by killing probably the most powerful terrorist in the world, particularly after Osama bin Laden was killed. I mean, there's basically no one that commands the firepower, that has the global reach that Hezbollah has. And Hezbollah, like I said, was run with an iron hand by Hassan Nasrallah. And now the entire leadership of Hezbollah has been decapitated, has been killed. Their replacements, including Hassan Nasrallah's own replacement, has been killed. Senior level leaders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps have also been killed. And this is an unbelievable thing. And here we should also note, if we're talking about the Americans for a second, so even before this happened, the United States, the administration, the Biden-Harris administration, let it be known that they had stopped sharing intelligence information with Israel. They were not supporting Israel's operations in Lebanon because Israel wasn't willing to have a ceasefire. As I showed in my last In Focus, Senator Tom Cotton went on CNN and set out all of the weapon systems that the United States are refusing to supply Israel with, including the very bunker buster bombs that Israel apparently used in the hit that took out Hassan Nasrallah. So that's very important. So what are the implications of what Israel just did? What direction is Israel now turning after we just took out such a big guy? I mean, he wasn't a fish, like I said, it's not that that's a big fish. This guy is like, the blue whale of terrorism. I mean, he's huge. He's bigger than Moby Dick, all right, in terms of global terrorism. So why everybody in Tehran and the regime there, Khamenei and all of his deputies and all of his henchmen are apparently in a state of terror. And that's not me saying that. That's actually a Russian regime aligned website is saying that the Iranians are terrified that Israel is going to take them out. And here, I think it's important to look at where we stand today in the context of Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the UN.
This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair.
He gave these two competing visions of what the Middle East can be. And he then he said that you can get to the vision of peace by defeating the Iranian Axis.
Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning.
Israel is winning, right? Israel is winning this war. We're winning this war. And then he goes through what we've done to Hamas.
On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network.
Okay, so, Israel has massively denuded, whatever the statistics say, a very, very large amount of Hamas's operational capabilities. And what's important about that is because there's been a lot, I'm just going to say this parenthetically, the left's line on attacking Netanyahu, even after he approved Hassan Nasrallah's elimination, and then we went ahead, our Air Force went ahead and actually carried it out, which is unbelievable. So now the left is saying, well, we could have done this on October 11th, and that Netanyahu had rejected a plan that was put forward by Gallant, the defense minister, to start the war in the north and to take out Hezbollah, I'm sorry. So the problem with that is that on October 11th, we were still reeling. We hadn't gotten our sea legs, not even close, after October 7th. And the Hamas that we faced was the Hamas with the arsenal that they had on October 6th and 7th. That is, with thousands and thousands of men under arms and thousands of rockets. One of the journalists that I saw on television about an hour ago recalled that it was so bad and Israel was under such attack in the early days of the war from Gaza, from Hamas, that when the German chancellor came to Israel to express his solidarity after October 7th, he was forced to lay flat on the runway when he was going back to his plane to fly home because we were under massive missile onslaught from Gaza. So the idea that we were going to be able to commit a massive amount of arms, air power, and ground forces to Lebanon when Gaza was very, very much a live front and extremely dangerous and attacking us, actively attacking us in those days is insane. And if it simply, the only way you can make that claim is by hoping that we all forget where we were in the early days of the war after October 7th. And so once you realize where we were, it's obvious that things had to happen in a much more linear fashion. We had to take care of Gaza and the front there before we could turn enough of our attention, enough of our firepower away from the southern front in Gaza and to the northern front vis-a-vis Hezbollah. And as I said in the last program, Hezbollah had 150,000 to 200,000 missiles, ballistic missiles capable of hitting northern Israel and all spots in Israel multiple times on the eve of this war on October 8th when they opened their missile offensive against Israel. And up to two weeks ago, now it's much more, they had attacked Israel with 8,000 projectiles. Now it's at least 8,500 because we're being attacked by a lot of them every day now. And they're trying to put together some sort of a coherent response to the decapitation that they're suffering at the hands of the Air Force. So he said of Hezbollah in a speech that we've also knocked out about 50% of their missile capabilities, and we've obviously decapitated their leadership, including the mid-level leaders, through the beeper attacks last week. So this is a very, very big deal. But are we done? No, we're not done. So as we know, nature abhors a vacuum. And if Israel says, okay, well, we've done enough, we can just pick up our marbles and go home, and we can agree to a ceasefire under terms like these or others, we know that that's not the case. We know that that's not the case because 1701, the ceasefire deal that was agreed to at the end of the last war in Lebanon, was never honored by Hezbollah or by Lebanon, that they never did remove Hezbollah's forces north of the Litani. To the contrary, they rebuilt their bases, but they did it inside of apartment buildings in South Lebanon. And the Lebanese armed forces and the UN forces that were supposed to be the sole armed forces south of Litani have been auxiliary forces to Hezbollah all along, or at least at a minimum since 2007, 2008, when Hezbollah swallowed the Lebanese government, the Lebanese armed forces, and started killing UN forces, and so domesticated them and made them auxiliary forces to Hezbollah. So there's never been a moment when that resolution, when the previous ceasefire was not breached by Hezbollah and by all of its accomplices in the UN and in the Lebanese military and Lebanese government. And the only armed force that can be trusted to keep Hezbollah forces from killing Israelis along the border, from invading Israel, from replenishing their missile arsenals, etc., is the Israeli military, is the Israel Defense Force, which means that the 5 divisions that I was talking about last week that are perched now on the border or training very urgently before a maneuver inside of Lebanon, they are going to be needed, because the only way to physically remove those forces from the border to allow the Israelis to live at peace in northern Israel is for the Israeli military to dislodge Hezbollah forces and apparatuses and supporting forces and auxiliary forces from the border zone and move them north of the Litani River. And in fact, it's been reported that the government is already actively considering reinstating the security zone that Israel operated along the border in South Lebanon for 18 years until we unilaterally withdrew from that security zone in May of 2000. So, I saw that Minister Amichai Chikli, he has also put forward a plan to reinstate the security zone in South Lebanon. And this is absolutely necessary because, again, the only force that's capable of defending Israel are the Israeli Defense Forces. The UN won't do it. The US won't do it. France won't do it. No Arab force will do it. The Palestinians aren't going to do it. The only ones who are going to defend Israel from our enemies are the Israelis themselves. So that's very important. Now, when you talk about the road ahead, we also have to look at Iran. So one of the major foci of Netanyahu's speech was really Iran and the threat that Iran poses not only to Israel, but to the entire world.
Iran's aggression, if it's not checked, will endanger every single country in the Middle East and many, many countries in the rest of the world, because Iran seeks to impose its radicalism well beyond the Middle East. That's why it funds terror networks on 5 continents. That's why it builds ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads to threaten the entire world. For too long, the world has appeased Iran. It turns a blind eye to its internal repression. It turns a blind eye to its external aggression. Well, that appeasement must end, and that appeasement must end now.
So here we see the strategic implications of the attack on Hezbollah, right? It's that one of the main reasons that Israel has not attacked Iran's nuclear installations, its ballistic missile installations in a very serious way is Hezbollah. Now, it's true. Another one is the Democratic Party, which since Barack Obama was president and now during the Biden presidency has sought to appease Iran as the centerpiece of their Middle East policy and has been undermining every Israeli effort to block Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. But be that as it may, from a simply military strategic perspective, the main deterrent on Israel towards attacking Iran's nuclear installations and other strategic installations in Iran has been Hezbollah. Because with 200,000 projectiles pointed directly at Israel and with Iran forces perched at our border, Israel was deterred. And we saw this over governments. We saw this over general staffs. We saw this across time for like 20 years. Israel was afraid to take it, except for 2006, where we put out a satellite show and came home with essentially nothing accomplished because of 1701, which was not enforced and not implemented at any time. Israel did not take serious action against Hezbollah because we were deterred. So if Hezbollah is deterring us because they have an existential threat pointed at Israel, because that kind of firepower directed not only would have been able to just overpower all of our air defenses, all of them together. I mean, if you're shooting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 projectiles into Israel every single day for 2 months, then with all due respect to Iron Dome and David Sling and the Arrow missile systems, Israel's multi-level missile defense system that nobody else has, they can't respond. They can't defend against 3,000 missiles a day every day. And that was the threat that that Hezbollah posed, which is basically of the level of a nuclear threat, just without the fallout. So that was why Israel wasn't attacking Iran. But now that's gone. I mean, it's not gone. But now Hezbollah doesn't have the capacity to launch a coordinated all-out missile assault against Israel. Even when they're really trying, they haven't been able to get out more than 100-odd missiles a day. And just today, for instance, one of the missiles fell. I don't know, it was intercepted en route or it just fell in Hawara, a terrorist stronghold right outside of Shechem, right outside of Nablus in Samaria. And that was supposed to go to Tel Aviv, and instead it misfired and it went to Samaria and it hit a terror town. It hit a Palestinian terror town. And so, that I think is indicative of just how much their missile force is in disarray. Israel also killed the head of their missile forces. So, this is a time, right, to go after Iran, because they don't have their insurance policy operating in a coherent way anymore. If right now Hezbollah is down and out, now is the time to go after Iran's nuclear installations. And so that's why Tehran, as the Russian media is reporting, they're terrified, because they should be terrified, because their insurance policy has just been canceled. So that's the other thing. And that goes to, the morality of what Israel is doing. And, I saw that actually President Biden put out a fairly supportive statement. You have, AP putting out obituaries of Hassan Nasrallah that look like, he was their dear leader, but whatever. But you have, you're going to see the normal dynamic of the cowardly Westerners, the progressives, the fake human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, that have been working hand in glove with Hezbollah, just like they have with Palestinian terrorists for decades. And they're going to be putting out these attacks on Israel for indiscriminate bombing, for, I don't know, going after civilians, whatever it is. I mean, like they said that the beeper attack at Leon Panetta said it was a terrorist attack. I mean, who carries beepers? The only people who are carrying the beepers are terrorist operatives. So whether they're at home or at their base, the fact that they have a Hezbollah beeper is a sign that they are a senior or mid-level terrorist affiliated with the Hezbollah terrorist organization, which means that they are a military target at all times, because they have a beeper at all times to call them to action at all times, because they are always on duty. Therefore, the idea that this is a terrorist attack to take out thousands of terrorists in one fell swoop, with almost no non-terrorists being harmed in the action, is simply immoral. It's moral obtuseness. It's moral blindness of the highest order, and the fact that it was expressed by Leon Panetta, the former director of the CIA, the former defense secretary under Obama, is frightening. Obviously, we've come to expect it from people like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders, and that whole clique. But, this disease of immorality, of moral blindness, has reached some pretty alarming heights in the sort of Democratic Party hierarchy. And that was terrifying. And of course, you're seeing it in the media, you're seeing it in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But who has been celebrating Nasrallah's elimination? So you see in Syria, in Idlib, where they were massacred by Hassan Nasrallah's people. You see it in Iraq, where they were massacred by Hassan Nasrallah's people. You see it in Iran, where women in Iran are celebrating his death. You're seeing it among opposition to the Iranian regime. They're celebrating his death because he wasn't only a terrorist who was trying to eliminate the state of Israel and the United States, the little Satan and the great Satan. He has the blood, again, of tens of thousands of Iranians, of Lebanese, of Syrians, and of Iraqis on his hands directly, and probably hundreds of thousands indirectly. This guy is a butcher, and the people who know who he is and people who truly value life and don't look at it as some sort of a theoretical extrapolation of a theory written by some postmodern pseudo-philosopher king who tells us that everything is morally relative except for Jews who are immoral inherently. They understand that taking out a murderer of his level, not to mention all the other murderers who have been killed over the past 2 weeks by Israeli Air Force pilots, they understand that Israel is conducting the most moral war that we've seen, I don't know since when, since World War II. That we are taking out the most evil, the most murderous terrorists the world has ever seen. And we're doing it, in prime time, right there on your television screen. You get to watch them go bye-bye. And you should, be thanking Israel for this. Everybody who wants to live in security, not only in Israel and in the Middle East, but throughout the world, should be happy that these arch terrorists are being taken out and should be hoping that Israel goes forward and takes out Iran. And that was the last message that Netanyahu essentially delivered in his speech. The whole concept of the Abraham Peace Accords was premised on a lot of things, but one of the most basic premises of the Abraham Accords is that Israel is a good bet, that Israel is the regional power, that it is the dominant regional power, and that Israel can be dependent on as an ally to take care of the radical Islamists, whether they're, of the Muslim Brotherhood type or the Shiite Iranian type, which, by the way, they all operate together. Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas, and Iran is the Shiite, and Muslim and Hamas is a proxy of Iran, right? Even though one is Shiite and one is Sunni, because they are unified in their desire to see global empire of jihadist Islam that's going to reign worldwide and obviously going to annihilate all the Jews together. So that's if Israel is a regional power that's capable of taking care of Hamas and taking care of Hezbollah and taking care of Iran, that's the basis for the blessings that Netanyahu presented in his UN address, where he said, this is what we can get. And he said, we're winning. We are that player. Why has all the peace talk faltered over the past year? Because of October 7th. Because on October 7th, Israel was weak. Israel was ravaged. Israel was the victim. Israel was the weak party. And the strong party was the Iranian Axis. And everybody saw it. And since then, we got our sea legs, we got our bearings. We brought in a massive army to Gaza, 330,000 reservists and regular forces, or 300,000 reservists plus the regular forces went in there and crushed Hamas. And it was really hard because we were unprepared. Because we hadn't planned this war, because we had a general staff who thought that the enemy was the Israeli right. I mean, they were completely out to lunch, which is why they missed all of the signals that they saw from Gaza, because they weren't taking them seriously as an enemy, and they didn't prepare for war. So it took a while to get this whole thing organized, and yet we did. And it was really thanks to one man. I mean, obviously lots of men. But I mean, the fact that we're still in the fight and that we've reached this point as a nation, and despite all the, prattling of the left, oh, well, we could have done this on October 7th and all the rest of it. I mean, you have a unity of forces in Israel today of celebrating what happened yesterday in Lebanon like we've never seen before, because we all understand that Netanyahu is right. We are fighting for our survival. But if he hadn't been at the helm of Israel on October 7th and since, I'm certain that we wouldn't have gotten to this point. American pressure, another leader wouldn't have been able to withstand it. The arms embargo, he wouldn't have been able to temper it at all, minimize it at all. He wouldn't have been able to get together and start making, massive investments in the middle of a war for our survival in domestic military production. I mean, all of these things, and keep the country going and keep the army going and keep them motivated and pushing them forward, demanding that they go forward. And in the end, with the past 3 weeks, what we've seen, he's also finally captured their loyalty. You see that he gives orders and they do them. They give him information that they were hiding information from him for months, according to, the sources inside of that sphere of the prime minister's office and the military. On both sides, they're leaking it to the press. On the one side, they're proud of shielding him, and on the other hand, they're complaining that they're not getting. It's not going on anymore. And look what we're able to accomplish. We got to this point because he wouldn't let go. And so we all have to, and like I said, what a ballsy move, approving this plan and then going to the UN and giving that speech. I mean, it's going there and telling them one message, which was the most important message, I think, which is that Israel is the guarantee of the survival of the Jewish people, not the United Nations, not the international human rights, conglomerate of anti-Western activists, not progressive activists on the street braying that Hezbollah and Hamas are the good guys and that Israel is the bad guy, that the genocidal terrorists are the good guys and the people protecting themselves from genocide are the war criminals. Reality is what it is. And, Israel was established 3 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, after the end of the Holocaust. And the one understanding that everybody shared from 1945 on, and arguably from 1933 on, is that the only way for the Jewish people to survive is to have our own country, our own army, and our own leaders who are answerable to the Jewish people, to the people of Israel, that they understand that their only real responsibility is to protect and maintain the survival of the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel. And he goes into this sick circus of Jew hatred called the UN, where Israel was pilloried every day, day in and day out, like the past 2 weeks or something like that. And believe me, I haven't really been paying attention because I just don't have the bandwidth to care about it enough. But he goes there and he says, shame on you. He says, we are the regional power. We are fighting the enemy of humanity and we're winning and you can trust us. And if you make peace with us, we have God's blessings, and we are going to open up a zone of peace and prosperity, the likes of which humanity has never seen. And he also said at the end, he said, we're going to win no matter what. That's true. And Israel will prosper no matter what. And we're going to go forward, as he said, Al tira v'al tichad, the words of Joshua, right, and God and Moses, and we're gonna win. And this is going our way. We haven't gotten there yet. This Shabbat was a big deal. Hassan Nasrallah being dead is a great thing. And yes, anybody who wants to thank Israel, appreciate it. But if not, whatever. Anyway, take care. Am Yisrael Chai, and I'll see you again later this week.